osati kupikisana. Tikuluka ngati chimbalame, mbalame, pita pamwamba tsogolo lilingwe, lilingwe. Wila chita palimodzi, sinchira zathu nzimodzi. Can you see it? Tikuluka ngati chimbalame, mbalame, pita pamwamba tsogolo lilingwe, lilingwe. Wila chita palimodzi, sinchira zathu. Welcome, everyone. We are happy to have you join. We are going to allow a few minutes for folks to join the webinar before we begin. Casey, I wonder if you want to go to the next slide, or Aubrey to the next slide. Yes, just so folks can introduce themselves.
Auntie, tuanze ndia alizo.
Namaliza kale.
Ndipo ngari njuchi, titayenda limoti pemosa boka. Ndipo tilindi pamvupo titili tonse, kutukulana osati kupikisana. Tikuluka ngati chimbalame, mbalame, pita pamwamba tsogolo lilingwe, lilingwe. Wila chita palimodzi, sinchira zathu nzimodzi. Can you see it? Tikuluka ngati chimbalame, mbalame, pita pamwamba tsogolo lilingwe, lilingwe. Wila chita palimodzi, sinchira zathu nzimodzi. Can you see it?
Nyamata mbela iwe ungate, na wensikana mbela iwe ungate. Asa kuyese kape, ola ukutebe, tukulu.
Okay, I think we're going to get going here. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Christine Toriason, and I am from FHI 360, and I'm very happy to host today's Global PrEP Learning Network. And we apologize that we did open the line right at 8 o'clock, so folks are still joining, and we just had a few technical things to work out first. So let's go ahead. I see many people are introducing themselves in their chat, but I'm going to go through a little bit of housekeeping and just some background before we launch into our full session today on cabotegravir. Just a note that we are going to do questions in the chat box. Questions and comments are welcome, but please be sure to select everyone when you are writing in the chat so that your questions and comments can be seen by all. Next slide, please. So this is our agenda today. We're going to do some welcome and introductions, and then we're going to have a presentation on various studies and introduction projects being planned for cabotegravir, as well as a presentation on the regulatory and introduction pathway, and then move into a panel discussion. Our session today is an hour and a half long. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to start with a brief moment to let you all know that previously the PrEP Learning Network was hosted by Options and then by Choice, and now it's being hosted by MOSAIC. So basically we keep moving through different funding sources. And so this was just a brief background on what the MOSAIC project is, which is a 5-year project funded by USAID that's focused on research and research translation for the introduction of new biomedical prevention products with a particular focus on women in Africa. Next slide, please. So we are very honored today to have a number of outstanding speakers and panelists, and I'd like to briefly introduce them. So Sinead Delaney-Morletwe is a research professor and director of research at the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa. Her research interests span the intersections between infectious diseases and sexual and reproductive health. She has worked on multiple phase 3 trials of new HIV prevention products, including oral, topical, and most recently long-acting injectable PrEP. And she's led several oral PrEP implementation projects. Michelle Rodolph is a technical officer with the testing, prevention, and population teams of the WHO HIV, hepatitis, and STI department. She works on PrEP with a particular focus on PrEP delivery for women, future prevention products, and integration of HIV prevention into SRH programs. Next slide, please. Nitya Panapak joins us from Bangkok, Thailand, where she is the executive director at the Institute of HIV Research and Innovation. She has a deep interest in key population-led health services, which empower key population lay providers to design and co-deliver HIV and STI services to their peers. We're also joined by Stephen Mills from Thailand in the Asia Pacific region, where he works for FHI 360, including on the EPIC project, and he has worked in the HIV field for over 25 years. He is a member of the Global Fund Technical Review Panel and was co-editor of the HIV Biobehavioral Surveillance Guidelines for Key Populations, published by UNAIDS, WHO, and FHI 360. Next slide, please. We also want to welcome Beatrice Grinstein, who is an infectious disease physician and has been working on HIV/AIDS patient care and research on prevention and treatment for over 3 decades. She is the head of the STD/AIDS Clinical Research Laboratory at IPEC Fiocruz and is the principal investigator of the Fiocruz NIH-funded clinical trial unit, which is affiliated with the HPTN and the AIDS Clinical Trial Group and Implementation, Prevention, and Therapeutic Clinical Trials and Cohort Studies. Omar Sued joins us currently from the Pan American Health Organization in Washington, D.C. He's an infectious disease doctor who has been caring for HIV patients since 1995. Prior to joining PAHO, he was the research director at Fundación Huésped, where he implemented several large HIV prevention and treatment trials in Buenos Aires, and has also been involved in multidisciplinary and implementation research for vulnerable populations. Next slide, please. Finally, from the Africa region, we have Hasina Subedar, who is Senior Technical Advisor supporting the South African National Department of Health since 2015. She has supported the implementation of pre-exposure prophylaxis, PrEP, and the She Conquers campaign, focusing on HIV prevention amongst youth. And Professor Saika Mullik, who is a medical doctor with a PhD, who currently oversees a large portfolio of projects at WITS RHI that address the introduction of innovative approaches and technologies for HIV prevention and sexual reproductive health. Her experience is primarily in sexual and reproductive health and HIV prevention research with a focus on adolescent girls and young women. And of note, Saika is currently a member of the Strategic Leadership Committee for the MOSAIC Consortium, so is really a co-host with me today. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're really thrilled to have you all join us today. We know there's a lot of interest in injectable cabotegravir for PrEP, and so without further ado, I will turn this over to Sinead to give us an overview of the research and introduction studies that are currently being planned for this new prevention product. Over to you, Sinead.
Thanks very much, Christine, and thanks very much for the opportunity to talk with this on this webinar. It looks like a great crowd, so I'm looking forward to this afternoon session. Next slide, please. So just to recap for all of you, there were 2 large phase 3 trials, HPTN 083 and 084. And those trials found that cabotegravir, long-acting cabotegravir, was generally safe and effective as PrEP. And in fact, their data supported the approval by the FDA of cabotegravir for use as PrEP. The HPTN 083 trial was conducted in cisgender men and transgender women who have sex with men and enrolled over 4,500 participants in North America, South America, South Africa, Thailand, and Vietnam. And Beatrice, who's on the call, was the co-chair of that trial. And the primary outcome observed was that people who received cabotegravir had a 66% lower risk of HIV infection compared to those in the Truvada arm. The HPTN 084 trial was a trial conducted primarily in cisgender women. We enrolled just over 3,000 participants at 20 sites in 7 countries in sub-Saharan Africa. And what we saw in that trial was that women who'd received cabotegravir had 88% lower risk of HIV infection compared to those on the Truvada arm. And we believe that these results were primarily due to the adherence advantage conferred by injectable PrEP. It's important to note that both of those trials were unblinded early, and since then we have been working through various data analyses and the transition to the open label extensions. So we have learned a number of things since that initial unblinding. The first is emerging evidence that was presented at CROI last week to show that the protective effects of CAB appear to be sustained over time. So data from HPTN 083 looking at data for the unblinded phase for about 1 year showed a very similar risk reduction to the estimate from the blinded portion of the trial, although overall incidence in both arms was a little bit higher, and I think there are a range of explanations for that. Importantly to note, the majority of those infections occurred in people who either had injection delays or people who'd been off CAB for more than 6 months, and no new safety concerns. The second presentation at CROI, which again reflected on data from the 083 trial, looking at the unblinded data with 1 year of follow-up post-unblinding, sort of affirmed what we had observed in the blinded portion of the trial, which is that CAB, because it's such a powerful antiretroviral, essentially suppresses viral replication and so delays antibody production, which means that we have delayed detection of HIV with conventional diagnostics. And the reason that people are concerned about this is that prolonged monotherapy with CAB could lead to INSTI resistance. So there was work done to see whether more sensitive HIV RNA assays could detect these early infections and so prevent the emergence of resistance. And there's some evidence to support that coming from that analysis, that with better diagnostics, you can detect these infections earlier and so prevent the emergence of resistance in some cases. And then the last piece of emerging evidence really comes from the 084 study, where we did an analysis of people who became pregnant during the blinded portion of the trial. And really the aim there was to assess, well, in that population, they interrupt injections at the point that pregnancy is first detected. But because CAB is a long-acting drug, we thought it was important to really look at safety and PK during pregnancy. And what we found there was that there were no congenital anomalies observed, and that the residual CAB was generally well tolerated during pregnancy, with drug concentrations comparable between pregnant and non-pregnant women, which is reassuring because it means we'll not have to do dose adjustments in the open label extension. Next slide, please. So just to remind you of what is happening now with those two trials, both of them are moving forward into open label extensions. So HPTN 083 has transitioned many of the sites into the open label extension. And that means that those participants are now given the opportunity to choose their PrEP method. They're also given the option, if they're starting CAB for the first time, of whether they want to go direct to injection or use the oral lead-in. There is a companion study in adolescents, which will continue follow-up in the adolescents that were enrolled in that study. And then 083 also has a separate protocol, which is looking at factors influencing adherence. Next slide. In 084, we have very exciting news. We are transitioning participants now into the open label extension phase of the trial. what we have done is modify the protocol to also allow women who become, well, basically to relax the contraceptive requirements, and for women who become pregnant to allow them to continue dosing during pregnancy and breastfeeding, with the goal of collecting additional safety and pharmacology data, which will potentially provide more evidence for use during pregnancy. Unlike 083, we don't have a separate qualitative protocol, but we do collect qualitative information in selected sites, and we'll also expand that data collection now to include male partners and also healthcare providers to get their views and insights into CAB introduction in a range of the countries involved in 084. There is a companion adolescent study that enrolled 55 participants. Those participants, many of them are coming to the end of their follow-up on open label CAB, and they will be offered an opportunity to continue accessing CAB through the parent trials open label extension. And just to say that there are a number of additional studies under review within the PTN, including a multi-purpose technology concept of CAB with another drug, as well as a number of integrative strategies that are looking at including CAB as PrEP. Next slide. Just for you to be aware that there are a number of additional analyses in progress. There is additional, similar to 083, the data that's was presented on the unblinded portion of the trial, we will do the same for 084. And I think of interest to everyone is work that is planned around correlates of protection, which will give us some idea about the protective levels of CAB that are required to, or that are associated with HIV protection. There has also been interest, particularly in women, to look at extended interval dosing. So instead of injections every 8 weeks, move those out to 12 weeks to align with contraceptive visits, and that analysis is forthcoming. Across both 083 and 084, there is interest really in drug-drug interactions with hormones. So in the 084 trial, we had a sub-study looking at collecting data in a population that were using either DMPA, NETN, or etonogestrel, which is included in one of the implants that's commonly used in the region. And so we will, although we don't expect it, it will be confirming really that there are no significant drug-drug interactions. And similarly on 083, there is work to look at possible interactions between CAB and gender affirming hormone therapy. I've already mentioned to some extent the acceptability and product preferences work. And then I think of interest to everyone is really the work around cost and cost effectiveness, but also modeling the population impact potentially of CAB. And there is a fair amount of work already in progress on that, and some manuscripts and abstracts that have been submitted to conferences. Next slide. So then moving along, really, I think what's exciting and what everyone is interested in is what are the next steps after these trials. And, you know, kind of clearly there is a need to consider how to include CAB as part of PrEP programs, particularly in the areas of high HIV incidence. So the USAID MOSAIC funded study will be take place in 5 countries and will primarily enroll women, and hopefully is anticipated to offer CAB to just over 4,000 clients. The UNITAID MPrEP project will continue in Brazil with the goal to enroll just over 1,000 participants on injectable PrEP, and the target population there will be men who have sex with men and transgender women. Next slide. And there is also a plan funded through UNITAID, also in Brazil, to look at inclusion of adolescents, either offering PrEP or on-demand, either offering CAB or on-demand PrEP, oral PrEP. The UNITAID project in South Africa is led by my colleagues at Wits RHI and will involve adolescent girls and young women with the goal to initiate just over about 2,600 adolescent girls and young women, as well as older women. And then finally, there are a number of Gates-funded projects that are planned, which would look at offering injectable PrEP in Kenya and South Africa, but within the context of private pharmacies. Next slide. So in addition to that really exciting demonstration project work, and I should have mentioned that all of those projects are sort of really in the protocol development stage, that MOSAIC also, in addition to those planned introduction activities, will also focus on a number of activities that really support introduction of CAB at a country and health system level. And so, for example, MOSAIC will focus on technical assistance to inform the development and adoption of guidelines for and implementation plans for CAB PrEP. They will also focus on some of the work around market shaping, including analyses for demand forecasting. Under service delivery, there will be a focus really on developing materials to support healthcare providers to deliver CAB PrEP, and also kind of focused on considering differentiated service delivery models. Under uptake and effective use, there will be technical assistance really to create demand for CAB PrEP. And then importantly, from a monitoring and evaluation perspective, there will be a focus on resistance surveillance. And obviously I can see from the questions that this is an issue that's come up. And really across all of the work, it's a focus on building collaborations to support CAB PrEP introduction. So working with civil society and local partners and really facilitating webinars like this that really kind of provide an opportunity to exchange knowledge and to kind of maximize coordination and lessons learned across a vast network. Next slide. Also to highlight that BioPIC was a Gates-funded activity, which really involved a number of stakeholders who, ahead of the approval of CAB-LA, really considered issues around introduction. And so there are a number of resources to highlight, really, including the strategy brief, the product introduction framework, and the advocates primer. Next slide. And then for those of you who want more information about cabotegravir, our colleagues at AVAC have updated the PrEPWatch site really to provide information about cabotegravir, and that will be updated as more information becomes available and additional resources are developed. So thanks very much, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Sinead. That was a terrific overview. We do have some questions that have come in through the chat and welcome more. First question from Catherine Kripke is, were there any instances of resistance among those who seroconverted due to injection delays or greater than 6 months off CAB?
So the phenomenon that we're seeing by and large, and again, the data is largely coming from 083, is that in fact we see infections that are breakthrough infections on CAB, and we don't fully understand the mechanism, and those may be associated with resistance. But the concern that we all had about the tail and sort of the emergence of resistance in that period does not seem to be being realized. That resistance appears to be in these infections that occur as breakthrough infections while on CAB. And that's both at, originally there was this idea that it was sort of at high concentrations, but these infections are sort of occurring in the context of people who are receiving injections on time.
Thanks, Sinead. And related to that, Catherine also wanted to know what the continuation rates are among those who initiate CAB.
So I don't have that.
It is a clinical trial, so it's probably very high.
Yeah, I don't have that data for, well, I don't have the continuation rates on 083. What Rafi Landowitz presented at CROI, I think sort of what we've learned is that part of the reason for the higher incidence that they observed in the unblinded period is that many more of those infections are related to people who sort of outside of US sites, who are now sort of the bulk of people on the trial, and this is part of their trial design, but also that there are you know, kind of people are, after sort of 3 or 4 years on study, are sort of choosing not to come back. In 084, we're just beginning that transition, so it's a little bit difficult to say what the continuation rates are. But kind of so far from the first sites where we're seeing the transition, it looks that about 8 out of 10 people are opting for CAB, and the remainder are choosing Truvada. And I think the people who had already sort of been lost to follow-up will kind of have sustained that.
Thanks,
So I don't know if
Sinead.
that entirely answers your question, but it gives you some hints of what we might see.
Yeah, it is certainly the big question for the introduction studies, is to see what continuation looks like outside of a clinical research setting. So exciting times. Another question is from, I believe, from Megan Dunbar, are whether there are any plans to look at drug-drug interactions with CAB and dapivirine to assess for safety for potential overlapping use with ring.
Not at the moment. We haven't had that discussion. I mean, sort of my reaction would be that we do use drugs in combination for antiretroviral therapy, but kind of obviously this is something that may be an issue in the future, and certainly kind of I think there are going to be opportunities as well in the demos to consider these issues.
And then I'll just go try to look at questions related to the HPTN studies, and then I can move over to the introduction studies. So did 084 include people assigned female at birth who didn't identify as cisgender?
Yes, we did, although the numbers of that population were not large, and although at the time the study was introduced, we had sort of limited experience of offering services to people who are sort of gender non-conforming or non-binary or trans. There are in fact a few of around less than 1% of the trial population who did not, who identified as trans or a non-binary.
And then related to that question, I think there was a question for the introduction studies on whether they would offer PrEP to trans men. And so I can answer for MOSAIC introduction studies that we will be offering to people assigned female at birth, regardless of their what gender they identify as. And I can turn it over maybe to Beatrice and Inez and Catherine to respond for the Unitate studies. Go ahead, Beatrice.
Hi, thank you so much, Christine. At this point, the idea for our implementation study is to offer CAB-LA in this implementation study for individuals who are male at birth. So it is targeting young MSM and travestites and transgender women. So this is the idea so far for this implementation study.
Thank you, Beatrice. And I think the same is true for the study being led by Inez. Inez, can you confirm?
She says in the chat.
Okay, agree. Yeah. And then Catherine Martins, do you want to say anything about the South Africa Unitate study?
Yeah, thanks, Christine. I think similar to MOSAIC, we're also focusing on people who've been assigned female gender at birth, but regardless of what their gender identity would be at the point of enrollment.
Terrific. Thank you all. I know we're a little bit over time here, but let's just ask, there are just a few more questions I'd like to put out from this presentation. So there is a question about, for Sinead, that you mentioned that resistance is overcome by using non-INSTI regimens. Were these mainly PI-based first-line regimens? How do you envision this working in South Africa, where dolutegravir is our first line due to high pretreatment NNRTI resistance?
That must have been another talk that I was giving. But I mean, I think it's the question that all of us are scratching our heads around. And I think sort of what we're trying to grapple with is that CAB is so effective at preventing HIV, but there are these cases that we've seen primarily on 083. On 084, we have so in cisgender women, we have far fewer data. We really had 4 infections, and all of them could be explained by not being on largely on drug at the time or being infected sort of prior to CAB initiation. So I think the unblinded data from 084 will be really important for us to understand sort of the range of infections in the population and the issues that we're dealing with kind of in the context that you describe. But obviously resistance is a concern. I mean, you know, countries do have second line regimens. So I think we're really going to learn a lot from the implementation studies about sort of how common sort of resistance is. It is a lot about sort of the diagnostics that we use. And so the data that I mentioned sort of has made the point that if you have ultrasensitive HIV RNA testing, you can detect some of these infections early before resistance emerges. And, you know, kind of this is really, I think, sort of what people are trying to get their heads around, because adding that testing to programs is really going to increase the cost. So we need to think about sort of optimal testing strategies. But it is reassuring that if people do acquire HIV on CAB, and those instances are rare, you know, kind of still the incidences in the trials are low, then it is possible to treat those people with alternative regimens. And that is something I think we're going to have to discuss with all of our HIV treatment programs about how we identify these people up front and link them to care rapidly.
Thank you so much, Sinead. And there was also a question about recruitment strategies in the planned studies. Will they target particular populations that are not sufficiently reached with oral PrEP, or focus on populations eligible for PrEP in general? I can respond from the MOSAIC side that right now we are conducting an analysis trying to identify in the 5 countries where the study will be who are the unreached populations. And then part of the recruitment will depend on the study sites selected, because if CAB is not being simultaneously rolled out for the broader community, the demand creation and recruitment will have to be targeted for those communities where the study sites exist. There are other questions here, particularly that around CAB and pregnancy, and I think that's something maybe we can address in the panel discussion. But in the interest of time, I'm going to move us on to Michelle's presentation. And thank you so much, Sinead, for that wonderful overview. Over to you, Michelle, to talk through the regulatory and introduction pathway.
Thanks so much, Christine. And Christine, could you just confirm if you can hear me okay?
I can, yes.
Okay, good. This has been a problem for the last 2 years. So my name is Michelle Rudolph. I work with WHO based in Geneva. I'm as Christine introduced, technical officer working on PrEP in the HIV, hepatitis, and STI department. I do want to just clarify a bit the title of my presentation. I'm going to I'll touch on the regulatory pathway, but I'll focus more on the pathway to a guideline for WHO. So next slide, please. So here, with the help of MOSAIC, put together a slide about the regulatory timeline for long-acting cabotegravir PrEP. And as it relates to WHO, it's included here. So as we know, the FDA approved cabotegravir PrEP in December 2021, right before Christmas. ViiV has submitted the national registration dossiers in several countries. So in sub-Saharan Africa, this is including Botswana, Kenya, Malawi, South Africa, and Uganda. WHO will meet next month with our guideline development group to discuss whether or not WHO recommends long-acting cabotegravir as PrEP. Assuming that there is a WHO recommendation, the manufacturer will be able to apply for the drug to be on the WHO list of pre-qualified medications. For USAID, they will include, if all goes according to plan, the drug will be included in the procurement catalog mid-2022. Assuming there's a WHO recommendation, the WHO plan would be to release that recommendation in the middle of this year. And in terms of the end of this year, that's when there would be additional, we expect there to be additional country regulatory review decisions made. Next slide, please. So here I've just pulled out some of the product overviews of the long-acting cabotegravir. I'm going to start with the testing guidance. And the caveat, the asterisk there is, according to FDA, there is testing guidance for the 4th generation RNA assay to be used. That's the US decision. We do not know if other countries will also require that. We also don't know what WHO will say. I can say that WHO is looking at this, and this is a concern for low and middle income countries. Having this requirement would be a concern, especially due to cost and availability. We know that, and I'm not going to go through everything here. There's 15 little pieces pulled out, but I do want to just pull out some key pieces. So we know that the product is high efficacy at the individual level, and there is an opportunity for epidemic impact if widely used. The product has a shelf life of 3 years. The product has only been looked at for prevention in terms of sexual exposure to HIV, being vaginal or rectal. There is potential for HIV drug resistance, and this is something that many are looking at, including modelers, to understand how much of an issue this will or will not be. The storage requirements are to keep the drug at 2 to 25 degrees centigrade, and with a short, exposure up to 30 degrees permitted, but lengths unknown. Product dispensation likely to take place in a clinic, and client privacy will likely be needed for the injections. Next slide, please. So here is where I'll start to talk about the WHO review process and the considerations for long-acting cabotegravir. So next slide. So as part of the WHO guideline process, one of the first steps is to do a systematic review of the evidence. So the 2 major trials that will be considered in this systematic review are HPTN 083 and 084. It will also include, we'll also look at ECLAIR and HPTN 077 to include the safety data as well. Next slide. A key part of all WHO recommendations is to look at the values and preferences of users, communities, and providers. For this recommendation, we've worked with UNITAID's projects, BITS-RHI in Southern Africa, with Biotech Fiocruz, and the University of Bahia in Salvador in Brazil. We worked with MSM populations, adolescent girls and women, key populations, to sex workers, to understand the values and preferences of the users and communities for this product. WHO does not recommend a product without taking into consideration the user groups. Next slide. We're also, for this recommendation, we've conducted a survey among providers of oral PrEP and included questions to ask what their preference and opinion is on offering a long-acting injectable product as PrEP. So this information from this survey will also be included in our recommendation, assuming we have one. Next slide. So as part of a WHO recommendation, in addition to looking at the evidence of efficacy and the values and preferences, that will go into the recommendation itself. But a recommendation will also include in the accompanying narrative about general implementation issues and research gaps. And I have a few more slides following up, just questions that we will address with the guideline development group. We will ask questions about how to deliver the product for specific populations. The mode of delivery, will we deliver within current PrEP programs, within key population services, within SRH services, for example, antenatal and postnatal care services, and also discuss with the guideline development group other prevention option choices. Next slide, please. Other specific implementation issues that will be discussed will be whether or not to move forward the oral lead-in. We know FDA has said it's optional. We know that it's optional the open label extension, but we'll still discuss this with our group. We'll also discuss the tail and what we need to do to cover the tail to avoid seroconversions and drug resistance. This will be included in the systematic review, but also this will be discussed amongst the group to understand how to cover this in an implementation setting. And also we'll discuss about restarting after missed appointments. How much wiggle room do we have? Next slide. HIV testing. We understand from the trial results that there was challenges with initiation in acute phases, and there was delayed diagnosis for seroconversion detection in the tails seroconverters. It's been posed as will not be the only option, but we don't know if it will or won't. We are looking at some modeling data to answer some of these questions, and these will not be available at this time for the purpose of this webinar. Next slide. And then the specific population issues. We know from the trial results that transgender women were included, but transgender men were not specifically targeted to be included in the trials. We need more information on implementation among key population groups, including trans men, sex workers, and people who use drugs, since we don't have the implementation experience in these groups. Now, with transgender women, it's a different implementation issue, and it's concerning the buttocks, implants, and fillers. It excluded some women from the trials. So we'll need to look at alternative muscle injection sites. Next slide. And this is where I say thank you to the team I work with at WHO, in particular, Rachel Bagley, Robin Schaefer, and Heather Marie Schmidt. And Christine, thank you and MOSAIC for giving me the opportunity to speak. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Michelle. We are very excited to see how the discussions evolve in with the WHO guidance meeting that will take place in March, and we hope to see the outcome from that, by June or July. So I don't know if there are any questions for Michelle. I see some ongoing questions for Sinead, but I didn't see any related to the timeline, and the introduction planning by WHO. Feel free to add those to the chat. Does anyone who are in the panelist room have any questions for Michelle that they'd like to raise? Okay, you are crystal clear. It's wonderful. Well, then let's move on to our panel discussion, because there are many issues to unpack here as we consider all of the potential questions related to implementation of this product. Next slide, please. So just a reminder that we have 6 panelists today specifically to answer some questions, but we have more folks and experts in the room as needed. So we are going to I'm now going to ask my colleagues to put on their videos, Nitaya, Beatrice, Saika, Steve, Omar, and Hasina. And we're going to go by region and get some reflections from the Asia Pacific region first, and then move to the South American region, and then to the African region for some comments and reflections on what has been presented, and what are some of the issues that you are grappling with related to introducing injectable cabotegravir. Could you go to the next slide? These are 3 prompts that we have for our panelists to consider, but they are welcome to comment on whatever is on their mind. We would like to know what they are hearing from potential users, providers, and communities about their desire and interest in injectable CAB for PrEP, what they see as the greatest opportunities and challenges for implementation of injectable CAB for PrEP, and what do they see as the benefits of expanding the HIV method mix and offering informed choice across multiple products. So with that, I will turn this over to Nitaya and Steve first to think in terms of the work you're doing in the Asia Pacific region, what issues are coming up.
Thank you very much. I cannot see Steve on the screen. Okay, I can see you now. Steve, would you like to go first?
No, please go ahead, Dr. Nitya, and I'll follow.
Yeah, thank you. So to answer the first question, I think as already mentioned by Michelle, we will be launching the values and preferences study among transgender women and men who have sex with men in I believe 18 countries and territories in the Asia Pacific region very, very soon. And we hope to learn a lot from that study, which will include the discrete choice experiment component as well. However, by looking at several small studies, asking people who are currently on PrEP or who used to be on the oral PrEP and now already stopped or discontinued oral PrEP, we can see that around 75%, and this is men who have sex with men and transgender women, would say that they are very much interested in injectable cabotegravir. That's probably one evidence that we can refer to at this moment. Looking at our participants in the HPTN-083 study who were asked whether they would like to switch from oral TDF-FTC arm to the injectable cabotegravir, we will see around, not everyone, so it's around 2/3 of participants who would say that yes, they probably would want to switch or are already transitioning from oral products to injectable products. So I think we will need to learn much more, and by doing values and preference without people really visualizing the clinic flows may not actually give us the right answer though. And then to address the second and the third question, I probably will kind of like combine it together, because I don't think that I can like talk about opportunities and challenges without touching on concerns about rolling out or expanding the choices. So for us here in the region, I would say that because of the experience of scaling up oral PrEP in many countries in Asia Pacific, we are depending the scaling up on the availability of the generic products. So for us to try to say that should we like start talking about including injectable cabotegravir into our essential drug list, and then so that it can be reimbursed under our universal health coverage for PrEP. I think it's still very early, because we don't have any information on the availability, like the time frame of how soon the generic product will be available, and then at what price. So for me, I'm quite not optimistic in saying that it's very unlikely that the cost of injectable cabotegravir will be coming at a very similar range with the oral generic PrEP products that we are currently using in the country. So to say that it will be choices, I would not see it as a true scenario in the near future, but it's likely will be positioned in a way that oral PrEP is like first line PrEP. And if you cannot tolerate the oral PrEP for some reason, you may be considered the candidates for injectable cabotegravir. So it will not be like a true choices. So I just want to mention that cost is really the major factor to say whether injectable cabotegravir will become another choices for HIV prevention. And the second thing is around service delivery model, because right now services, PrEP services are mainly delivered through key population-led health services in Thailand, in Vietnam, in the Philippines, for example. And by having injectable cabotegravir right now as the things to be injected into buttocks every 2 months, it kind of like go in not being seen as like synchronized with what has been implemented by KP-led providers, in which you will need to then consider who can deliver this, and then for who then it point to where you can provide these products, and then how frequent it will need to be, and how you switch in between injectable one and oral one, and so on. So unless the studies in the pipeline can show that cabotegravir can be injected into the thigh muscles, or it can be self-injected, or it can be administered by lay providers, like if we have some of these guidance in any guidelines, that I would not say that it will kind of become expanded at the national level and being made part of the like combination HIV prevention programs very soon. And lastly is related to HIV testing algorithm, because we are talking more and more about the viral load testing, and that's again related to cost. And so I would really want to see all these implementation science studies really looking at how pooled viral load can be an option to be integrated into PrEP services. And believe this is not only for injectable cabotegravir, but will be for any PrEP products. I'll just stop here and let Steve continue. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Dr. Nitya. So I'll just be building off of several points that Dr. Nitya made. We actually sit in the same city, so we don't see each other very often now because of COVID, but we certainly talk very frequently. So she mentioned price, and I just want to build off of that, but also say that I would hope that we really don't let price get in the way of negotiations, discussions, and just moving forward with more implementation science and introduction studies. Because just to remind everybody that we were in the same place with antiretroviral treatment going on 20, 25 years ago when we all thought that, well, how could these be rolled out in lower and middle income countries because they were so expensive. Now it's true, the move towards generic ARVs happened relatively quickly. And so I think very soon we're going to have to be watching and listening, and also having community groups nudge and push ViiV to look at potential generic formulations of Cabolet in the future, or unless there would be substantial and very dramatic price reductions from the current very, very high price tag of ViiV that they currently have. The second point just relates to the community and key population-led health services that Dr. Nitya also mentioned. These, I feel, and I know Dr. Nitya does too, and many people on this phone call, that Cabolet really cannot be rolled out without the involvement of these community clinics. They have certainly proved themselves to be very capable of delivering HIV services across the entire cascade. Many of these organizations started out just doing outreach, maybe 10, 15 years ago. They then evolved into doing testing, into doing community-based treatment. And many of them here in the Asia region, and ones that are in Thailand, where Dr. Nitya and I sit, are already implementing community-based viral load and offering 4th-generation testing. So I think with this kind of capability that these community clinics offer and the draw that they receive from the community, that they are really the natural implementers, even taking into consideration the challenges of injection that Dr. Nitya pointed out. I'm quite confident that these community clinics really are going to be some of the major implementers. And you only need to look at oral PrEP here in Thailand, but Vietnam is also the case, the Philippines as well, where the majority of oral PrEP is being administered and provided by these community clinics that are trusted by the community groups. It's not to say that Ministry of Health public hospitals don't also have a role, but it definitely has to be both. And so that's why regional advocacy organizations such as ABCOM, such as APTN, who are already involved in the values and preferences survey that Michelle mentioned earlier, these will be key regional organizations for the rollout and the increased understanding of CAB PrEP that will need to trickle down to these organizations throughout the region. I do think, and again, Dr. Nitya pointed this out as well, that I think this values and preferences survey, we know already that the major answer is going to be that there's a big demand for injectable PrEP. And that part of that is because injectable medications in many of these countries, at least in Asia, but I think in other countries as well, are already preferred over oral medications. And so we shouldn't be surprised that that's going to be the same for CAB-LA as well. So I'll leave it at that and turn it back over to the facilitator or to the panelists from the other regions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Steve and Nitya. Those were some really terrific reflections. I'd like to now ask Omar and Beatrice to share some of their thoughts from the South America, Latin America region.
Thank you. Beatrice, go ahead, please.
Thank you. So first of all, thanks for the invitation. It's really great to be part of this panel, and thanks for the presentations and the discussion so far. So going directly to the first question, what are you hearing about the potential users, providers, and community? So we have already results from some studies that have been done here in the region in the context of the Unitaid-funded PrEP study. So we conducted 2 online surveys. The first one in 2018, including 19,000 MSM, and the second one last year in 2021, including 16,000 MSM non-binary and trans persons aged 18 years or older, living in Brazil, Mexico, and Peru, and those were recruited through social media. So back in 2018, 42% of the individuals assessed expressed interest in using injectable PrEP. When the same survey was done in 2021, in which we inquired about the interest in using several possible prevention modalities, again including injectables, monthly oral PrEP, and implants, the proportion of individuals who wanted to use an injectable went to 75%. So in these surveys that we were able to see a lot of interest in injectable PrEP. So we also did, in the very end of 2020, we conducted a discrete choice experiment study among sexual and gender minorities from all Brazilian regions. That was between September and December 2020. And the survey had 2 pieces because we were in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. So we did a face-to-face component that was held in 5 Brazilian capitals, and we did an online part of the discrete choice experiment study that was conducted in the entire country. So the total sample size was 3,924 individuals, 90% of them MSM and 9.5% transgender women or non-binary. And so the most important things that appeared in the study results were that level of protection was the most important attribute. And also when you ask it specifically about presentation, injectables and implants were the preferred as opposed to oral PrEP. So, and participants were willing to accept a 4.1% protection reduction to receive an injectable PrEP option. And this was something that we found that was interesting. So the we found that protection against HIV was the most important attribute, as I just mentioned, and that programs should focus on the technologies that this could reunite the most important attributes, such as maximizing acceptability and also user appropriateness of these products. Now, I'm sorry, I was going to move to the second one. Should I do that, or is Omar going to?
Yeah. No, please, go ahead.
Okay. So moving to the opportunities and challenges, we see as the major opportunities that we have are that PrEP awareness has increased significantly in the community. So this is a major opportunity for us to be able to include a new product. So again, in the results from these online surveys, we saw again, in the 3 countries, we saw that there was an increase in awareness in the 3 countries between 2018 and 2021. However, when we look to willingness to use, we see a major increase in willingness to use PrEP in Brazil, and this is most probably related to the true availability of PrEP through the public health system. So I think that this comes to what I wanted to say about having this increased awareness and the actual possibility of using as true facilitators of including a new product. So as you know, Brazil is in the vanguard of HIV prevention in the region, and we already have PrEP services providing TDF-FTC, generic TDF-FTC since 2018. It's a very bold program that includes same-day PrEP, delivery for individuals at increased risk for HIV infection. So currently we have over 300 delivery facilities across the country, and now including also family health programs providing PrEP. And we currently have around 34,000 individuals, mostly MSM. And overall, only 10, Omar will certainly expand on this, but only 10% of PrEP users in 77 countries that were surveyed are in Latin America, and most of these individuals in the region are in Brazil. And it's still a very small number related to the demand that we have. In a study that we conducted back in 2018, we saw that modeling study, 66,000 individual MSM would be assessing PrEP in the first year of availability, and it didn't translate in reality. So major challenges that we envision are education of healthcare workers and also clients on injectable cabotegravir, the adaptation of services. In our case in Brazil, it most probably CAB-LA will be delivered in the same services that are already delivering oral PrEP, and several of these services already provide treatment for syphilis, injectable benzathine penicillin for syphilis. So this is something that is also a facilitator because services already provide injectable injections, injectable products. So this is something that may facilitate. There are issues related to the space to organize the injections, and these services will need some level of course, of adaptation. One thing that is something that we take a lot into consideration is the risks related to judgmental attitudes from providers. As providers can make their choices based, they can make choices and not the clients do actual choices based on the provider's perceptions related to the risks of HIV acquisition and not actually assessing risks for PrEP non-adherence. That could be a major thing to be, that is a major thing to be taken into account when offering an injectable PrEP product. Also that we need to guarantee that the increasing choice actually translating PrEP expansion for the most vulnerable and not offering more options for those who are already benefiting from oral PrEP and those who can better navigate the health systems. So I think that this is also a major challenge. As already mentioned, the HIV testing algorithm is something that will impact that may impact cabotegravir rollout in LMIC. So I think this is something that we need to do a lot of good thinking on how best to implement these implementation studies that are being planned so that we can actually test possibilities for this HIV algorithm. And the challenges go beyond establishing the algorithm and implementing the algorithm, but also educating the healthcare providers on how to deal with HIV test results in the setting of CAB-LA, and also to educate clients how to deal with the CAB-LA tail. So there are several aspects related to the HIV testing and that goes beyond establishing the algorithm. Obviously, the issues related to costs are important, but in our case in Brazil, we are very confident that with the history that we had of being able to incorporate options in HIV for HIV treatment and also being able to incorporate PrEP as a public health policy since 2018, we are confident that if CAB-LA when CAB-LA is registered in our country, we may be able to also incorporate this option for those most in need. And about the last question, I think that I already tried to respond it, and I think that the major point is offering choice will, as we saw with contraceptives, it will most probably expand use and people will be able to exercise the choice according to the different moments of their lives. But we really need to make sure that expanding choices translate in expanding choices for those most in need and not for those who already benefit from what is already available. Thank you.
Thank you, Beatriz. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be here today, and what a challenge to say something after such as great speakers and panelists that addressed the question very well. Regarding the first question, what is the view from the potential user? We recently finished a systematic review about perception of the potential user of long-acting therapy, and it's interesting how different can be the perception in different populations, and this is something that we need to take into account when we strategize how to deploy or roll out the long-acting. For example, in different, in particular, for example, for transgender women, the issue about the silicone in the buttocks is something that really limits the interest, and also even if they don't have silicone, they want to have in the future. So it's something that we need to work together in gender affirming different approach in order to make safe for the transgender to have their body, and also to have the better prevention strategies. Also, the rejection that they suffer in the different healthcare settings make hospital or clinics less desirable for God to receive the injection. So I fully agree with the comment of Nitalia and Steve about how to deal with the community provision or service delivery of injectable PrEP also in the rollout efforts. for drug user, for example, it's interesting to see that for them, the interest is more in the what happened with the tail. I mean, maybe the drugs users that are very knowledgeable about pharmacokinetics and the effect of the drugs and the phase out of the drugs, they need to be very informed how long they can be protected and what to do in the tail. For Black women, in particular in America, in North America, is the mistrust in the system, the mistrust in the doctor need to be addressed before started to offering long-acting because of rejection about injectable in the medical institutions. And also in other women, in women with experience in contraception, the experience of using injectable contraception can be good for them. Among sexual workers, in particular female sexual workers, the high risk of suffering violence and rape is something that they are afraid of, and having the possibility to use a long-acting may feel more protected and the protection more stable and not subjected to stigma for the pills. And finally, the adolescent, and I am so happy that the Brazil is starting to examine what's happening in PrEP among adolescents, is probably one of the population that more problem has to access different prevention methods in different qualitative studies. The most decided PrEP option will be still is condoms, because they don't want to go to buy, they don't want to go to hospitals, in particular in countries that the reimbursement companies can send back to home the bills, or the information can be recorded and the parent can access to the information about sexual habits or sexual preferences and the demand for PrEP in this scenario. So we need to try alternative way for adolescents to have confidential access to PrEP services, and potentially some, even in some school, can be a good place for receive PrEP and information and documentation. Interesting, in Australia, for example, in a survey in 1477 gay men, 80% of them were receiving PrEP. When they were asked about what they want to receive in the future, they say 30% they say implants, 21% prefer daily PrEP, 30% prefer long-acting, and the rest event-driven PrEP. So when you have the different options, there are different populations that will be more eager to use one or the other based in different styles. So I think that going to the second question about that is, then we need to rethink the prevention paradigm. I mean, we started talking about the importance of demedicalize the provision of PrEP and make easier for the people to access. And this is really something that is very difficult in Latin America. As Beatriz say, we are the region with lower uptake of PrEP, but also in HIV in general. I mean, we have the same number of people that are infected every year in the last 10 years. There were no reductions in the HIV incidence. The reduction in the mortality was half of the global reduction also. And it's because the interest for HIV is not so big as before. Yesterday was presented in the CROI, the global volume of HIV testing decreased since 2018, before the pandemic, and it works after the pandemic in this work presented by CDC among 41 countries in all the globe. So if the testing is decreased, this is the big opportunity to provide counseling, to identify people at risk, to put the people HIV positive earlier in treatment to reduce the transmission, but also to work in PrEP programs. So we need to relaunch the interest for accessing a good sexuality, to enjoy the sexuality, to work in sexual in structural factors, to the people can talk about sexuality without any problem, but also to test and to offer HIV testing. Finally, I think the cost will be a big issue in Latin America. I mean, we don't receive international funding, in particular in South America. We are left behind. International donors and money, or the research is limited. There are few groups only doing research and implementation for PrEP. So we need to work on that. And most importantly, most of the country doesn't have the benefit of accessing to generic for drugs that are patented. So this will be an issue in Latin America. But even if we could solve this issue, we will not solve the problem, because today we have PrEP, generic PrEP accessible, because the patent for tenofovir is not present in many countries yet, or is expiring. And even though the national program doesn't commit to implement PrEP in large volume, other than in Brazil and a very few countries. So, I mean, it's a long way to go, and we need to continue working together, empowering the communities and the civil societies in order they can demand more opportunities for testing and more involvement in the service provision, even of injectable PrEP. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Omar and Beatrice. I'm going to turn it over to our colleagues from South Africa, Hasina and Saika, for your reflections.
Hi, Christine. Hasina and I are going to tag team. Is the video on?
Yes, thank you.
Oh, okay. I'll start off maybe just talking about what we're hearing from our potential users. As part of our planning for the next phase of our UNITAID funded program, we've been talking to young people at our sites and to provide. What we're hearing is that young women are very interested. They're saying they're waiting for the injection. So not a lot of people know about it yet, but those who do are always asking us, when is it coming? We need this. We're tired of taking pills, we forget. Young women are very excited about the fact that it's potentially something they don't have to carry around. One young lady said, it's already packed in your body. However, there are some anxieties. Some injections do give people anxiety. Young people have expressed anxiety, but say, well, it's just like the COVID vaccine. I know Cabalé will benefit me in the long run, so I'll get it even if it's scary. But I do think, and some young people said, well, you know, they're scared of injections. They want to know what's in it. And I think to Tian's point in the chat, we are kind of introducing injectable PrEP in contexts where, you know, in some communities, there's been vaccine hesitancy around the COVID vaccine. So I think we have to do a really good job of the community engagement and really getting everyone to understand, you know, what this is and how it might be different. Some young people are worried about taking something that can't be easily removed. They said, you know, like pills being stopped or the ring being removed. So the long, you know, the long acting nature of the injectable is a concern for some. But just also in terms of opportunity, they said for AGYW, it will be such a normal thing because we're already going for a contraceptive injection, only now we have double protection. So I think there are definitely opportunities in terms of integrating with family planning services. And as you know, in South Africa, we have quite a large proportion of our family planning users who are on injectables. there was also a lot of discussion and issues raised from young people about the need to educate communities and peers, and also the issue of trust. I think one of the previous speakers spoke about trusted information. One young person said, you know, we wouldn't trust somebody who hasn't used it, you know, somebody who's just saying, you know, here's a method, etc., but they haven't used it themselves. So I think there's opportunity for young young users to really share their experience, and I think also for young people who've been on the clinical trials to really play quite an important role here. Another young person said the best thing though is we don't have to tell anyone, so the discrete nature of the injectable PrEP. If we don't have to tell anyone if we don't want to, especially for those of us who experience GBV. This is a game changer because we can finally be in control. No one will know unless I want them to know. And also the fact that this was a method that could protect against any kind of sexual exposure, whether it be anal, oral, vaginal, penetrative sex. You know, there was some opinions voiced that this would be good, that you're protected from all kinds of exposures. Providers and clients alike want reassurance that the product's safe and effective for long-term use. They're worried about side effects. Ideally, lower levels of side effects would be important. Affordable and easily accessible, and must be easy to initiate and monitor a person with a low chance of developing resistance. So just in terms of opportunities, I think, you know, people seem to have be beginning to hear about injectable PrEP. There's high injectable use in family planning programs, real opportunities to integrate, and, you know, a potential for a favored method by those wanting a discrete method. It's also a method that can be used by men and male partners, and opportunities to align with the existing oral PrEP services. I'm going to stop here and hand over to Hasina to talk about some of the challenges and the benefits.
Thanks, Saika. And thank you, Christine and team, for inviting me to share some of our insights. I think for us, one of the key learnings, especially from the delivery of oral PrEP, was to actually look at how do we translate clinical studies and research projects and the findings of those into real life settings. And I think one thing became very clear for us is that it doesn't easily translate. You actually need to really adapt quite a bit to be able to fit into a real life delivery setting. And one of the things that we are looking at now in terms of moving forward and looking at introducing new products into South Africa, including Kaya Ballet, is to actually look at implementation science type projects where we can look at real life situations and identify what are the gaps in information for service delivery that we need to identify and make sure that we have it available so that when we scale up the new product, we have the information at hand. And this would include things like the clinical pathways that we would be using. How do we integrate the new product into existing service offerings, looking very specifically at where we will be transitioning people from oral PrEP to injectables. You know, who are the early adopters? How do we offer these services to the different population groups? Because how we reach young people and how we reach men and how we reach transgender population, as well as you know, all our various high risk populations, is very different. And it is quite important that we don't stigmatize the delivery of the product. However, we also need to be sensitive to the requirements and the needs and the context for each of these different populations. And that has been an important part of our work when we looked at the delivery of oral PrEP. I think one of the other challenges that I foresee is the issue of the 2 monthly injectable. And a lot of our other products in terms of family planning and some of the other chronic medicines are usually in a 3-month cycle. So those are things that we would need to look at, is how do we dovetail a 2-month product with other service offerings, and how do we make sure that there is some kind of synergy around the visits that people would have to the facilities. And one of the other critical elements that from a service provider point of view is the issue of ease of initiation and monitoring. And we need to make sure that we provide our healthcare providers with the necessary guidance and make sure that they fully understand how these products will be delivered, how people can transition from one product to the other, how people can make choices, and what information they require and what tools are needed for that. Another critical element is the messaging. And I think that Tian and on the chat, there's been quite a lot around how do we mobilize communities. And this is one of the very important lessons we learned from oral PrEP, is to have consistency in messaging and making sure that the messaging is accurate and people have trust in this product. And the only way we can do that is making sure that we all speak the same language, provide the same messages, and instill trust in the product. I think those are some of the critical things. I think, Christine, I'm over. I see your time is over. There's many more insights, but we can definitely share those with you as we move along as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hasina and Saika. I know we are close to time and we have so many questions in the chat that I think we're going to have to respond to in writing in our resource sheet. I'm just wondering if it might be helpful with our few minutes remaining, Hasina, to ask you to just briefly describe what is the process for getting CAB approved and integrated into service delivery in South Africa?
So in South Africa, I think the first hurdle would be to actually get the WHO pre-qualification, followed by the South African Health Regulatory Authority approval. And that is absolutely critical for us to make sure that we can offer the product in country through our public health services. And the other big requirement is to actually look at the effectiveness of the product in impacting on the HIV incidence rate. And looking at how, from the cost point of view, I think one of the critical elements, and I think a lot of the previous speakers had alluded to the issue of cost. And it's not just the price. One needs to look at the cost of delivering the service, as well as procurement of the product, and how does it compare with another similar product, and to actually look at what impact this product would have versus the products that we already have. And in this instance, we have oral PrEP. So I think that those are some of the critical elements that we need to get over. And once we can make a case for the fact that this product is going to give us a good value in terms of reducing the incidence rates, I think that those are going to be some of the serious considerations that the government will take into consideration before the product is made available. And then, of course, I think, the other thing is the pressure from our healthcare users and requiring, an understanding of whether this product is going to be acceptable to our healthcare users, and how safe and how easy it is to use and to administer and make sure that people will get the desired results. So just in a nutshell, I think those are some of the key considerations. And once we have those in place, we can then look into, all of the other aspects around, training of people, making sure that people understand how to deliver the product, and there are clear guidelines available, and also making sure that there are mechanisms to create demand for the product. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hasina. That I think there's a lot of enthusiasm. There are many challenges and opportunities with this product, and we have, I think this coming year we will see a lot of progress on the various questions that have been raised today. So you could go to the next slide, Casey. I just want to thank our speakers again, Hasina, Saika, Steve, Nitya, Beatrice, Omar, Sinead, and Michelle. So much appreciate your coming on to talk through these issues with us. We will eagerly await the WHO guidance and continue to work together as a community toward answering the many important questions that have been raised today, so we can expand the choice options for HIV prevention. So with that, I bid you all adieu. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.